It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast as we cover the very latest property news every morning on iHeartRadio, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's what we do 7 days a week and already up to Wednesday morning. Yes, January the 24th today. Now, here's an interesting piece. Not that we need to be told this, but the National Australia Bank's survey reveals what we all know only too well, and that is a surge in consumer stress, reaching its highest level since 2020. Are you cutting back on expenses from entertainment to basic necessities? Well, the Australia Bank survey tells us plenty of us are doing exactly that in high numbers, amid rising concerns about the job security market in 2024. And the NAB Consumer Stress Index indicates over half of respondents have reduced spending on dining out, entertainment, and also petrol, which is a real headache at the moment. And of course, it's not helped, is it, by the rental market running red hot. CoreLogic tells us this morning that a record national median rent price of $601 per week, which is reaching just over $31,000 annually, and rent values have risen 9.1% annually in the past 3 years, which continues to see renters stressed and first home buyers really struggling to save targeted amounts for home deposits. Yes, not easy. Our thoughts are with you if you are in that situation. Well, this morning we are back to the time tunnel with our summer series of real estate interviews with the real estate industry's leading commentators. And coming up this morning, we go back to October of last year when we caught up with Daniel Koutzamanis, a mortgage broker in Melbourne, and he's talking about some of his clients selling apartments and losing money or receiving offers around the same price. Also, Nick Jones in Victoria is here, and he is talking about a secret location and the Melbourne property market. And this one you will not want to miss. Sameer Chopra, he is talking about a simple yet powerful real estate piece of advice. He calls it Metro-fication, and this is following the infrastructure of the railway line. As I mentioned, you won't want to miss that. That is all coming up as part of our Real Estate Wednesday on the way next.
Ready to take your real estate knowledge to the next level? So are we. You're listening to the summer series on the Real Estate Podcast.
Flammable cladding issues. How big of a worry has that been?
Well, that's the first thing that we're looking for in contracts of sales. For any client that's looking at buying a unit or apartment, that is the first thing we're getting them to well, we're checking ourselves, obviously, but we're getting their conveyancer to check with a fine-tooth comb because it's everywhere you're looking, there's a lot of cladding issues there at the moment.
And in terms of taxes for investors, how are you going with your clientele around this? Because they've taken a little bit of a hit.
Yeah, look, it's just not, it's not appealing anymore or beneficial. The latest Victorian government policies that are being rolled out, it's getting less and less appealing to invest. And I think a lot of mums and dads, were invested in these units and apartments. Some of them are feeling as if they're better off cashing out and putting their money elsewhere. Some clients were doing Airbnb, especially in the city. And obviously the Labor government's rolled out that Airbnb tax as well. So yeah, it's obviously becoming less and less appealing for investors to be in those types of properties at the moment.
I see that certain types of units, such as smaller apartments and student accommodations, now they've taken a bit of a hit, hardest in terms of price declines. It's got to hurt. Some of these units have recently sold for tens of thousands of dollars less than their original sale price. And no doubt you've got some clients that are entangled in all of that, losing money.
It's definitely a big talking point at the moment for those clients that are in those types of properties. Look, it is a demand and supply. There seems to be a lot more supply on the market for these types. And, as I touched on before, first home buyers are becoming more educated. They're wanting bigger space. And, those investors that are in these types of properties, as I said before, it's, they're not as appealing as previously. So we actually had a client about 9 or 10 months ago. She was trying to refinance and get a better rate. And fortunately, we couldn't do that because the values weren't there. She'd lost a considerable amount. She actually had a student accommodation apartment in Flemington and one actually in Carlton. So unfortunately, there wasn't really much we could do aside from going back to her existing bank and asking them for a lower rate. We really couldn't shop around for her, unfortunately, due to that drop in value. Yeah, it's really not great if like I said, if you're invested in these types of securities at the moment.
So as a mortgage broker, coming back to the cladding issue, are you sort of advising older and larger apartments as opposed to maybe some of the more modern builds at the moment?
Yeah, look, that's subjective, I think. Depending on where, how bad the issues are with the cladding. Look, my personal preference would be to go for more of an older style property, less in the complex, just because you've got a little bit more say. The build quality is generally a little bit better than what it is today. But, there's certainly complexes that are obviously being able to put the money together to make the necessary repairs. And in that case, I wouldn't be advising the client not to go ahead. So it's more about there being actually a plan in place to actually fix the issues. And if those issues are too costly, advising them to have a second thought about it.
Remember to follow us on any of the podcast platforms so you never miss a real estate podcast. You can follow us on Apple, Spotify and Amazon. Know your property with us. You're listening to the Summer Series on the Real Estate Podcast.
A very much loved suburb by the sound of it. Is this a bit of a secret, this suburb?
It certainly is. It's funny you say the 18 Ks from the city and things like that, but a lot of people, and even if you're from Melbourne, you might know of it, but a lot of people say you work in real estate or you live there, which I have for many years, and they say, where do you live? Blackrock? I say, oh, where's that? And typically you say, well, it's the next suburb along from Sandringham, because Sandringham's on the train line and end of the train line, so everyone knows of that train line. So yeah, it is a little kind of quiet enclave, very popular for locals, but also it's becoming more and more known, and people are coming from further afield as well.
Now, I was reading that you're talking about the train line. Because the train line goes just to Sandringham, you can't go further into Blackrock. That's sort of kept it a bit of a secret by the sound of it.
Yeah, it has. That's right. And it's part of its charm, but also a lot of people who don't know it or are used to transport say, oh, it's a bit isolated and things. But as I say, that's part of its charm. And once you've lived there, it is also serviced by the buses. So it's only 3 kilometres to the clock tower in Blackrock, which is a bit of an icon on Beach Road, to Sandringham train station. So really, from half of the suburb in Blackrock, you can walk to the train station, if not serviced by the bus.
So, Nick, what really stands out for you in 2023 in your market, apart from your serious marathon running?
Thank you for that. Yes, so I did notch up my 10th marathon in very hot Sydney. It happened to be 30 degrees on that day, which is far from ideal to run a marathon, but beautiful location. Another market in the sense of anything highlight, we just sold one off market in Blackrock, which I sold a block of land to them back in 2019, and they put a stunning home on it. And we introduced a buyer to it through an off market campaign and sold that for just a tick over 4.6 million. So that was a terrific real estate highlight, and also what we see in the market, it's just listings are very tight, as you said at the top of your introduction, across the board with rentals and sales, and that's just keeping things and prices very firm in terms of there hasn't been much reduction since the heights of the 2021-22 COVID market.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You've got to sort of pivot, and I actually hate using that word. That's a word that sort of got invented a few years ago, pivoting. But I'll use it in this particular context because I think real estate agents, people that work in the industry, very adaptable.
We had to be. I think everyone had to be. Let's face it. I've only got very young children, 3 and nearly 1 year old, but so I didn't have to put up with the homeschooling. But people that had to do that, and all walks of life, and whether you're elderly or young, and what you had to do, you had to adapt, and it showed that we could. As I say, bringing it back to real estate, how we conducted our business, one-on-one inspections, and all these things, online auctions, online tours, with taking a video of a property and walking buyers through. We'll transition to so business could be done.
The skyline is constantly changing, growing and expanding. We deliver the most property podcasts across Australia every week. We unpack all the important stuff so you're better informed. Know your property with us on the Real Estate Podcast.
Yeah, Craig, I just sort of came up with that term. We were thinking about, just the big change that some of this infrastructure is going to drive, particularly the metro line. Let's just call it Metro-fication, because large parts, many suburbs are going to get vastly transformed. They're going to look very different next year and in the following years to what they've looked like previously. So, early one morning, came up with the term Metro-fication.
Now that we know what Metro-fication is, it definitely clicks, I think, in people's minds. Now, I mentioned the 49% in capital values over the past decade, which is outperforming surrounding areas by 5% on average. So the metro line is lined in gold.
Yeah, Craig, you could say that. The initial idea around this increase in price growth for apartments that are close to train lines, particularly metro lines, came about from some stuff we were looking at in London and in Dubai. And in both of those cities, there were brand new train lines that were built, and housing started to really perform well near the train lines. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like, people want a shorter commute, so they're willing to sort of pay up to live in an environment where they can travel to work or travel to events very, very much more conveniently. And in Sydney, look, at this stage, there's about a 5% outperformance happening. I think we're still in the first innings of where this is going to go. I think, as time sort of rolls on, that 5% is going to become 10, 15, 20%. These suburbs along the metro line, they're still ripe for very significant outperformance compared to suburbs that are a little bit further away.
And Sameer, you guys are predicting that as Sydney expands its metro network, it will continue to drive higher residential price growth, shorter commute times and improved living experiences. And I noticed that you've got some examples about Castle Hill and Crow's Nest in terms of their growth. So perhaps tell us a little bit about that.
Castle Hill has outperformed Borkham Hill, and Crow's Nest and St. Leonard's have outperformed Willoughby and Lane Cove. And this outperformance, when you compare against all the other suburbs, is about 5% at this stage. And, my view is that as the next stage of the line opens up, and it means that people in Castle Hill can connect directly into the city and Barangaroo, I'd expect that, this price growth will be even better for some of these suburbs. People want to live here. And just to give you an example, Craig, so today to get from Castle Hill to the city takes about an hour and 20 on public transport. Going forward, that'll drop down to about 32 minutes, thereabouts. So, you're starting to save 40, 50 minutes each way in your commute. And, most people would love to get back an hour and a half in their day. And so that's what we think is going to happen, is people are going to move out into these suburbs. There'll be bigger demand to live in Castle Hill, Macquarie Park, Canterbury, Bankstown, and that's what's going to drive the price growth in these suburbs.
And what about people actually sort of getting on to this whole idea of chasing infrastructure? Because the investors do. Your Joe average, probably not so much. They're not really looking for it, are they?
So for Joe average, typically they're more interested in residential or retail as opposed to playing in commercial markets or buying infrastructure assets themselves. And this can be a nice way to do it is, look out for trains, particularly. Trains, faster bus routes, anything that cuts commute is super valuable. People really, really appreciate that.
Now, Metro-fication, you coined the phrase, and we're telling all of our listeners now about Metro-fication. No doubt you're talking to your friends, Sameer, sort of saying to them, well, you want to get in these areas because this is what we've found. Do you find that maybe sometimes it's like talking to a wall, or is there good uptake with people that you know when you're talking about Metro-fication?
Yeah, Craig, look, I don't think everyone's fully come to appreciate the value of these train networks because, it isn't fully functional as of right now. It will be next year, but it isn't right now. So I think sometimes you are talking to a bit of a brick wall, but when you explain how you're thinking about things, people start to appreciate it. It's similar to, today if you ask the average Australian, they want to live close to good schools. They want to live close to sort of good hospitals. And I'm saying you'll also want to live close to very good commute. So commute will come into your search category just like good schools come into your search category.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.